This is my talk about making a video board game cyborg, which, in my opinion, is the best possible organism of any game. Uh, so let's go into who I am to get started, just so you guys kind of have some reference there. I'm Eli Delventhal. I am the middle Delv Bro of the three. So you can see that arrow is pointing to me there with the orange shirt. I look exactly like that. That's straight up the same. I've been making games for quite a while, and professionally, I've been making video games for quite a while, which of course is a lot different from board games. Um, Made games that have gone out to millions of people. In other words, I've spent a lot of time thinking about video games. But I've never made a board game professionally before Tailmore. With Zach, actually, we made like a post-apocalyptic prototype board game a few years ago, but we never like went through the whole thing and shipped the game. So part of that, and the reason I'm telling you all this about me, is that I think that coming from a video game background to a board game development process really has given me kind of a unique perspective, especially on the app-based games. So that's sort of where I came from with this presentation. So, cyborg games. What is a cyborg game? Well, it's my cool name for an app-supported board game. Basically, you're taking a physical thing and you're shoving a bunch of technology into it to make it better, just like Robocop when he has a game piece sticking out of his forehead. On the right here, we have Mansions of Madness, which is an app-supported game that's really well reviewed. I don't know if you all have played it. This is the second edition of it, I think, and they do a really good job of making the app work with the game. It's a great cyborg, which I'll talk about soon. So one of the first questions to start with, I think, is why make a cyborg game? Because uh, there's lots of board gamers who just hate apps. They don't want to use their phone. They want to play the board game and that sort of thing. So um, you got to really think about why you're doing it if you're going to do it. So I think the biggest reason is that whether you're making a board game or a video game, they each have sort of pros and cons, which I have listed out here in a big list. Um, a lot of the board game advantage, I think, is the fact that you have people together, like around a table, usually a communal focus. Some of them are kind of solitaire type games, but generally, on the broad strokes, these are things that are specific to board games and video games, even though I know there's a lot of variety in between each individual board game and video game. Real world tactile is amazing for board games. There's obviously video games that try to do this with stuff like VR and like motion feedback and all this. And it's just worse than having a physical thing in your hand. It's all just, impersonating that. And then video games do really well in stuff like the rules are really easy to pick up because the video game teaches you as you go, and it also enforces the rules as you go. You don't have to set it or clean it up. It's really like fast to play generally, and usually there's like ongoing content. So in a board game, you're like generally playing that game once, and then you'll shuffle the cards, and then there's another game, and it's the same content across every gameplay, and you're mostly playing in order to like challenge other people or to get better yourself at it. Of course, there's like legacy games which kind of break this mold a little bit, but again, I'm talking about on average on the whole board games here. And then on the right side, we have cons. Video games often cause you to ignore people around you, which I think is generally not a great thing. And they're very insular. You're even in a party game, you're staring at a screen and everyone else is staring at a screen and you're not really like looking at one another and connecting like with a board game. And also, just obviously you have more screen time. And tied with that, I think video games, the bottom one here, they often have really money grubbing tactics that board games really avoid. And board games, obviously, as I sort of the opposites of the stuff on the left, a lot of time spent learning rules. There's usually a limited amount of content and sometimes like hours of setup and cleanup time. But again, these games can be different. Like individual games might not totally fit these things, but we're talking about the mold. So I argue that a well-made cyborg game gets you the best of both. Um, you have all of these pros here. If you do it well, all the connecting with people, there's the physical tactile components, you're connecting with everyone around you. The app can also enforce the rules, so it's teaching the rules dynamically. You can pick it up immediately. You can keep expanding the content with the app. You can basically download new scenarios or whatever, that sort of thing. And there's probably greatly reduced setup and cleanup time because the app will basically teach you how to do that as you go. And it can automatically enforce the rules. The big downside you still get is that there's even more screen time. Okay, so kind of jumping off those points, some cyborgs I think are done really well, and some I think are done really poorly. And in fact, in my research for this and research for Tailmore, I'll talk about in a bit, which is our game, um, definitely like it's kind of a hit or miss sort of thing I've noticed. If you look at these reviews on the left for Chronicles of Crime, which is a very well received game that totally relies on its app, um, I believe it's in the top 100 or 200 rated games on Board Game Geek, so it's really a well loved game. A lot of the comments in here, when they talk about the app, they're saying the app integration is perfect, it's innovative, it really makes me feel more like I'm part of the investigation team. And there's a lot of words around like, this is kind of bringing me into the game. This is a part of the game. And even the bad reviews on the bottom there, like the Adam Catant, an hour of hovering your phone over stuff and asking, has it scanned repeatedly? That sounds terrible, but he still gave it a 6, which is actually a good score for Board Game Geek. Then Consequential, a game on the right here, which I admittedly have not played. I did a lot of research around how the game works. But I don't have any app-based games that aren't good, so I had to look up one. Um, this You can see that the reviews are largely around um, the app basically being dull and not adding anything, being unnecessary. It's like something on the side. And you'll see that I'm going to go further with this kind of general concept. And then on the bottom there, you have MQ Stout, who is probably just a troll, but it's not a board game because you need an app. I would argue that you won't see any of those MQ stat reviews on games like Chronicles of Crime when they're done well. So what's the difference between the two? What did Chronicles of Crime do that Consequential did not do? The big thing is that there needs to be a reason to have an app. That might be obvious, but I think people maybe forget it because apps can be just kind of cool or whatever. You need a reason. That is the number one thing here. If you add an app because it creates a better experience, you've made Robocop. You have a cop who's more powerful and accurate than a human cop. He can take bullets. He's really strong, but he's got the empathy of a human. He's not like that thing that they screwed up if you've seen the movie. That's just this mechanical machine gun firing thing that kills a whole board of people. It's got the empathy. He wouldn't do that. Meanwhile, if you just add an app for no reason, well, that's like adding nipples to Batman's outfit. I don't know if you guys have seen this amazing movie, Batman and Robin, up there, but yeah, that's real. They decided to put nipples on the costume. So let's dive into Chronicles of Crime a little more. Chronicles of Crime has this game loop here. You basically, on the top left, let's start there, you have a bunch of pieces that you've laid out. Most of the pieces have a QR code, and this kind of represents your state of an investigation in a case to solve. So you have like your scientist there, like the doctor, the hacker, that sort of thing, and you can kind of call them up and get their help. And then you also have this guy, number 33 at the bottom, who's in Scotland Yard. So if you want to interact with the guy, if you go down to the next photo, you pull out your app and you scan him with your phone. And then that creates a result on the right here where he talks to you, and then you can see that he said, an old woman 7 has been found dead. And what that means is that that feeds back into the regular game where you find number 7 and you put that out onto the board, just like this guy 33 is a piece. So the app is an integral part of the game loop. For those who don't know game design theory, one of the big things in any video game is that there is a game loop. There's part of gameplay where one thing feeds into another, and you keep doing it. In a board game, that could be like a turn is kind of an individual like cycle of a loop a lot of the time. So Chronicles of Crime does a great job with the app being a core part of the loop. So you could not have the game without the app. It's just part of the gameplay. It's another piece. It could be a piece of wood, or whatever, except of course it does magical appy stuff. If you did this in the physical world as well, it would require you have like a giant book where it's like flip to page 50, flip to page 35, or like a huge stack of cards, and it would be super tedious and it would also be really less flexible. Now we'll talk about consequential here. So again, I haven't been able to play this. Did a lot of research into how it works, including watching the game creator talk about it. Um, but basically, as I see it, on the left here is the core gameplay. You have a bunch of cards, and what happens basically is you put down like challenges, and you need to roll dice and play other cards to pass the challenges that are listed. So it's kind of like um, get like 15 of this number and then you can defeat this card. That's sort of general concept. And if you think about everything I've described there, that all is physical. Meanwhile, what the app does is it essentially tells you what to set up. You open up the app, you can kind of answer some questions, which is sort of like storyline based stuff, and that ends up telling you what to put down. And then you play on the board game, and then when you finish the board game, if you wanted to do another like scenario, then you would go back to the app. So as I've illustrated here, basically you have two separate loops. You have your board game loop, you play your board game, and then you have your app loop, which is this sort of like really simple kind of dialogue system. There's no connection between these. There's not a consistent loop where the app is a part of it, and therefore you'll get reviews like we saw way back before that are the app doesn't really add anything. And something that's really interesting about this game actually is in his first implementations of it, he didn't have an app. He just had a stack of cards, and it wasn't a super big stack of cards. So this is one of those questions of like, why is the app there? Again, you need to have a reason to have a cyborg. So there's basically, I think, a number of guidelines you should follow in order to make a good cyborg, which I think is kind of the meat of this talk. And if you are interested in making one yourself, I would definitely, note these things down because they're a lot of what we learned working on Tailmore, and a lot of, I think, what makes Tailmore good is that we tackled these things. So here's a bunch of pretty icons, and now I will go into Englishing them. So the first point, as I mentioned, is having a reason. That's, of course, where you start. If you can't think of a reason to have it, then you can stop there. You don't need to worry about anything else. Just don't do it. The second, as I've discussed with Chronicles of Crime and Consequential, the app should be part of the core loop. It should not be a side piece. It should be something that feeds into the physical gameplay, and the physical gameplay should feed back into the app, and it should be a consistent loop. The app should also assist player connection. What that means is basically you can often have app-based games that are still pretty good. They're not bad, but they really distract from each other. You kind of take turns looking at an app, and you're not like focusing on each other. And I think that you can actually solve that problem. I'll talk about that as well soon. And then this is a huge one. The app cannot slow down gameplay. I think every single app-based implementation I've ever used, including Chronicles of Crime, which I think does this really well, you will be trying to play the game and then the app will screw up for some reason because it's technology. And then you'll be sitting there for 5 minutes dealing with this hostile app, and you totally lose the like flow of the board game, and it kind of ruins everything. And that's the kind of thing that's going to make people just quit and then say, I hate all apps forever. You want to use the best parts of physical pieces into apps. What that means is that physical pieces are great because you have these little things you can move around and track, and they're tactile, you can like throw dice, all that stuff just feels great. But like, you don't want to put that in an app, Why would you have fake dice in an app? Similarly, apps are really good because they can organize a huge amount of information. They can really simplify the game. They can enforce the rules, which is the next line here. And they can like randomize. They can give you pretty animations. There's a lot that they can do that you can't do with physical pieces. An example of this kind of paradigm here is the new game Destinies, which I also haven't played. But from what I've seen, the thing about it is that the app is sort of reproducing the physical world. So you have tiles laid out, and then you see those tiles again in the app, and you tap on them in the app to interact with them. And to me, I'm kind of like, well, why? Why don't you just use the physical pieces? So the app should enforce and teach rules, as I mentioned. That really helps make the game start and end much more quickly, and players don't have to spend hours learning rules like you normally do in many board games. And the app should also, these are kind of two that are tied together. The app should reveal content as you go, kind of like a legacy game. And it should also allow you to ship more content over time as long as players want it. So you can just update the app, and people with the same board game can have new play modes and challenges and stuff like that. Okay, I'm going to take a breath. So now we're going to move into kind of scoring different cyborgs based upon this kind of guideline criteria that I've made. Consequential, we'll start with that. That is our ugly stepchild, I guess, of the cyborgs. You can see that there's a lot of thumbs downs here, things that I don't think it satisfies from what I understand of the game. And then here's one of the reviews as we laid out before. The app's kind of dull and not needed, and gameplay is okay. I think that that's exactly as, pointed out with these. You're not using the best part of physical pieces. There's not really assisting player connection for all the reasons we've talked about. Here's another game, One Night Ultimate Werewolf, which I kind of view as like a pseudo cyborg. You can play it without the app, but the app will actually help you play. So there's not necessarily a reason to have the app because you don't have to have it. But the app still really helps with a lot of things. It makes the game a lot faster. It helps you like learn the rules. Unravels. It does not unravel more content over time, however, so it's sort of like halfway there. And then you can see that people are calling out the app helps add to the game, and that's kind of the feeling that you get there. It's basically a glorified timer in the end, though, so it's halfway there. And then we go to Chronicles of Crime. You have mostly thumbs up here, but where this really fails is that Chronicles of Crime slows down gameplay, given the like QR code scanning issues that we've mentioned before. And finally, I'm going to go into Tailmore, which is our game, and of course I gave it all thumbs up. This is kind of easier for us to have done because Tailmore was built for these guidelines, and that's the crux of this talk. Is if you take those away and you think about them as you're building an app, you can really make a much better app-based game, I think, Cyborg. So going into Tailmore really quickly, on the left here are basically what a typical board might look like. You can see there's a little like dungeon laid out with pieces on it. You have items and NPCs and characters and combat cards and all this stuff. And if you look closely, you'll see that every single piece has a QR code on it. And then on the right side here, you can see that the app is directly kind of connected and correlated to the board. So you can see those pieces there in that room A8. And then pulling out the phone and showing the combat view, it's those exact pieces in combat. I'll go into more about the specific functionalities in a second. So starting with, we're going through the guideline checklist here. Having a reason is our number one thing, right? Well, the big reason with Tailmore is that the game literally could not exist without the app. So you should have an app. And I think, again, that's where you should start. Is there any way you can make this without an app? There's complex logic, randomized scenarios, lots of like content that we can keep adding. There's really prettily animated combat systems that are kind of like Final Fantasy. You can see stuff like, this is what's happening over here, the scanning on the right. So the core loop thing, making the app part of the core loop. This is something that we really were inspired by Chronicles of Crime for. You can see that you've got a board laid out that the player's moving through on the top left there, and there's like the key JN. They pick up the key and scan it, and then that creates a new message that says, oh, you're looking at the key, you're sure that it was inert, blah, 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 and then it reveals a new door, D3. So you would add that new tile to the board, and then you could scan that tile, and then that would maybe reveal a new thing, and so on and so forth. This is one thing that Chronicles of Crime does not do well that we really racked our brains with how to do. I think every cyborg I've ever done kind of fails at assisting player connection because you're staring at that single screen. So it inevitably empowers a single player to like work at the app, and then everybody else is kind of sitting back. And that really splits the table, and I think is a Cyborg core issue. And it also is, I think, a real root of the "I don't want more screen time" complaint. Uh, One thing Tailmore, the solution that we had for it was actually to add more screens. um, we noticed that if every player has their own device and we sync those devices, then everybody's seeing the same message simultaneously, which actually encourages players to read aloud and other players to follow along. And so you're not like browsing Instagram on your phone or anything. You are directly connected with the other players. So even though I'm looking at my own screen, I am somehow more connected because I have my own screen. It is really interesting observation, and I definitely encourage people with the technical know-how who are making cyborgs to try this sort of thing because it makes a big difference. Next, the app cannot slow down gameplay. This is another one that we did a lot of iterations on. In the top left here, I've got a picture of the game Unlock Mythic Adventures. There's a lot of Unlock games. They're kind of like escape rooms. I really love them. I think they're a lot of fun, but I think the Mythic Adventures box I would avoid because I think they really wanted to make a super cool app, and therefore they screwed it up, and it slows down gameplay a lot. In this screenshot here in the top left, you can see those sort of like drawn angles, like there's like a hexagon in there, or I guess that's an octagon, and some other shapes and stuff. And there's like a mini game where you draw those things out on the phone with your finger, which sounds really cool, but we kept trying it and it wouldn't recognize what we were doing. And that kind of drove us crazy. And then we also had a time where there was an AR kind of, you hold the phone with a camera over a picture and you have to like look at a specific thing in the picture, and it would like not find stuff some of the time. So we would just be sitting there in a game we were having fun with, suddenly just fighting with this app. And this is also a time-based game, so it was really frustrating us. And then similarly, we have this Chronicles of Crime review again that says an hour of hovering your phone over stuff and asking, has it scanned repeatedly? And that's just a reality of QR codes we found. You can see these three screens here, which is kind of our solution for this problem, are from Tailmore. And that first screen, you're trying to scan the QR code, and you can see the light glares directly over the QR code. It will just never scan. So you'll sit there being like, oh, I gotta like move the phone, I gotta turn the like, I gotta pick the piece up this way, I gotta do that. And it just stops the gameplay. So we have this little keyboard button in the top left that you can tap, and then you just type a two-letter code and boom, that'll work just as well. It takes the same amount of time, it works fine, and it's maybe like slightly less magical than a QR code. But the great thing is that the moment you face frustration with the app, you immediately have an option to move on from it. And I think that is key with any app integration is it cannot stop the gameplay. It needs to be as easy as moving a physical piece on the board. Okay, finally, using the best parts of physical pieces and apps. Actually, I don't think finally. I got another one after this. But this one is another one that I think Tailmore really sought to do well on, and I think Chronicles of Crime did well with as well. You can see in the left, we have this picture here of modular physical pieces. You have this dungeon, and then the app can tell you, hey, you just fell down a hole and you dropped into the dragon's hoard. Flip all the pieces over and then drop the dragon in. And suddenly you're in a single contiguous horde room. And that's a really cool feeling that players really got into, and you just can't get that with like an animation in a game. This feels magical when it's in the real world. It's like the horde was hidden from you. Similarly, when you go back to the app here, this is the combat system. We have a really pretty complex, sort of simple deck builder combat system. That's like Slay the Spire Light, if you've ever played that video game. And this would be really hard to enforce all the rules and have it work so smoothly and quickly with just players figuring out the rules for themselves. You can just scan cards and see what happens. And this is a great way for people to just sort of experiment and learn. And it also is pretty and has like cool animations. Couldn't do that with physical pieces. Using the app to enforce and teach the rules. This is another thing that Chronicles of Crime does well, and we also do well in Tailmore, which is if you try to do something dumb, like someone's trying to move into a key, and you can't go there, that's it. The app just stops you, and there's no penalty. It's just like That doesn't work. And we've noticed some people think that they can move places because the move button is purely for going to different rooms. And then they get this message and they quickly learn, oh, I can't. And then no one tries it again. Same thing on the right here, we're tutorializing as we go. The first item that you pick up, the app tells you what to do with it and how it works. So we don't have to have people read the rule book. It's really like, it's pretty optional. It's kind of there as a nice reference, but the game will just immediately teach you as you go so you can jump in and play it quickly. And unraveling content over time is similar to the rule thing. It allows you to teach rules over time, and it also really has this feeling of like pulling back the curtain. The scenario starts with a single tile down, really quick setup time. And then in this example here, the cleric opens that door, D1, and then it says, oh, there's a lich and a chest in this room. And so the player knows, okay, I'm putting these down and this is where my party's moving. And so you never know what you'll discover. It's kind of like a legacy game, except a legacy game generally happens across hours of gameplay, whereas this is consistently happening as you go. And there are some games that do this with rule books, essentially. You flip through the book and then you kind of reveal it as you go. Like Gloomhaven kind of tries to do this, but you still know the general like strokes of what you're going to see in Gloomhaven because you have to have printed somewhere what you're going to put down. And the app really makes this nice. Finally, you should use the app to ship more content over time, as long as players want it. I think sometimes players won't want more content here and they'll want a physical expansion. Great, do that. But the app allows you to create, in our case, more scenarios. So here's all the scenarios that we have planned, and we could easily just ship more because it's all digital. More can be added over time. You don't need new pieces. Without an app, that's really not possible. I guess you could like email people another book to print out or something, but that's like much worse. And similarly, this can like fix problems. One thing that video games are able to do that board games can't do, is like make patches that fix things over time. So there's really some great advantages there. So we're back here. I hope that you will all make your own Cyborg games. Here's your nice little picture. Now maybe you can kind of guess what some of these little icons are for. Remember that you need to have a reason. You should make the app part of the core loop. The app should assist player connection. The app cannot slow down gameplay. You want to use the best parts of physical pieces and apps. You want to use the app to enforce and teach rules. You want to use the app to unravel content over time. And you want to use the app to ship more content over time. If you follow those guidelines, you will make a really great cyborg. And finally, some shameless self-promotion. Tailmore is live on Kickstarter now, so if you enjoyed, check it out on Kickstarter, get some more details. Okay, any questions? Feel free to unmute yourselves and ask away if you've got any, or comments, or violent disagreements. Okay.
No, that was a very enlightening talk. Yeah, thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. Anybody else have anything, or should we call it here? Okay. Oh, Mario, do you have something?
Oh, I just want to say, nice work. I thought it was very enlightening to see that the sort of thought process behind the perspective of app integration. Super cool.
Thanks. Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. And obviously, I'm hanging around this Discord all the time, so if you do have any questions, let me know. Or if you just want to, talk about game design or anything. All right. Thanks, everyone.